Hi everyone, my name is Sejin Ju, and today I'll introduce our paper using LLM for conversation assessment of mental health, testing the role of message contingency and user agency. Traditional mental health self-assessment tools like PHQ-9, GAD-7, and PSS have long served as efficient standardized screening instruments. But they have some limitations. They rely on fixed, predefined questions, leaving little room for personal context, narrative expression, and uncertainty. As a potential approach, the use of conversational AI chatbots has been proposed. They allow people to describe symptoms in their own words, and the iterative nature of dialogue supports self-reflection. However, most existing conversational systems haven't fully capitalized on this potential. Even when wrapped in a chat interface, they remain largely system-centric. So during the diagnosis process, patients don't know how their input was interpreted, what counted toward the final assessment, or whether they could correct a misunderstanding. This gap motivated our work. We focus on two interaction design variables that we believe are key to making conversational mental health self-assessment more user-centered. This first key term is conversational contingency. Rather than just being responsive, high contingency reflects an interdependent loop where the chatbot's output or response builds upon both immediate and previous user inputs throughout an interaction. So it means that it remembers every part of the user's core context and symptoms. This high contingency enhances stronger social presence, trust, and user engagement. The second one is user agency, the user's ability to exert control over the assessment process by reviewing and modifying the information used in the evaluation. In our study, after completing the whole assessment process, users can review a summary of their responses and revise any PHQ-9 item if they feel that their initial answer was inaccurate or expressed incorrectly. Based on this, we formulate 3 research questions. RQ1 is, how does conversational contingency influence users' perceptions of the chatbot and their overall experience? RQ2 is, how does user agency influence those same outcomes? Finally, RQ3 is, do the effects of contingency differ depending on the level of user agency, and if so, why? To investigate these questions, we built Mind, a PHQ-9-based mental health self-assessment chatbot grounded in a task-oriented dialogue TOD framework with 4 components. NLU, natural language understanding, classifies the user's intent from each utterance, for instance, distinguishing a symptom report from a frequency answer or an off-topic message. DST, dialogue state tracking, tracks the state of all 9 PHQ-9 symptom slots, maintaining severity scores, frequency information, and the status of each PHQ-9 item, whether it's answered, pending, or partially addressed. DP, dialogue policy, selects the next dialogue action. Importantly, it can execute compound actions such as expressing empathy while simultaneously asking a follow-up question within a single turn. Finally, NLG, natural language generation, generates the actual chatbot's response according to the selected dialogue action and the current dialogue state. For example, in this case, like, that sounds tough. How often have you had trouble in the past 2 weeks? To manipulate contingency in the high condition, the chatbot explicitly references prior exchanges. For example, you mentioned waking up a lot at night since last week. Do you also find it harder to concentrate during the day? In the low condition, each question is delivered independently with no reference to prior dialogue. The question is like, Over the last 2 weeks, how often have you had trouble falling or staying asleep or slept too much? Then it might robotically ask, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you had trouble concentrating? To manipulate agency in the high condition, users receive an editable summary after completing all 9 items and can revise any response. In low condition, no such feature is provided. We conducted a 2x2 between subjects experiment with 126 participants recruited from a large metropolitan university. 56 were women, 56 were men, 70 were women, aged 21 to 38. We measured 2 categories of outcomes on 7-point Likert scales. We also collected open-ended qualitative responses, which we analyzed using the thematic analysis. The open-ended questions we're asking, first of all, what are your thoughts on the mental health self-assessment AI chatbot used in the study? And secondly, we asked, after participating in the study, what do you think is the most important factor for users when conducting mental health self-assessment using an AI chatbot? For the quantitative data, we ran a 2-way MANOVA test to assess mean and interaction effects. The result was as follows. For the RQ1, high contingency significantly improved all 3 chatbot perception measures: social presence, trust, and perceived rapport, as well as perceived usefulness and behavioral intention to use. However, it had no significant effect on assessment credibility, and this tells us that contingency primarily builds relational trust. It makes the chatbot feel attentive, warm, and worth engaging with, but doesn't necessarily make the assessment itself feel more legitimate. For the RQ2, user agency showed no effects on most outcomes, but selectively and significantly improved assessment credibility. The editability feature gave users a sense of procedural control and transparency, making the assessment feel fairer and more trustworthy as a process. And now this is what we call procedural trust, distinct from the relational trust driven by contingency. Qualitatively, regarding the open-ended questions answers, this pattern was more reinforced. Users in high agency conditions more frequently mentioned self-reflection, feeling that AI wasn't making decisions for them. In contrast, privacy and trust concerns were most prominent in the low contingency, low user agency condition, and privacy and trust concerns decreased as user agency increased. For the RQ3, interaction effects, we found significant contingency and agency interaction effects for perceived rapport and behavior intention to use. This suggests that 2 features don't simply add up. They interact in a nuanced way, and combining both may be necessary to maximize certain user outcomes. Across all conditions, one consistent finding from qualitative analysis stood out. Empathy was cited as the single most important factor for a mental health chatbot, and users expressed growing expectations for richer, more personalized feedback, reflecting how rapidly LLM capabilities have advanced user experience and expectations. Taken together, conversational contingency and user agency serve distinct but complementary roles. Contingency fosters relational trust, making users feel heard and engaged. Agency enables procedural trust, making the assessment feel legitimate and controllable. Effective mental health chatbot design needs both. However, our current experiment was done by university-affiliated adults, so future work should examine more diverse age groups, varying levels of technological literacy and real-world clinical context. We also hope this work contributes to a broader vision of long-term personalized mental health assessment systems that support ongoing self-reflection and user autonomy. And now this concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening.